Hello and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Wyenberg. This time we will continue our reading of Have Spacesuit Will Travel by Robert Heinlein. Our hero Kip has just been hijacked to Pluto and thrown in a cell vertically. It was a long way to the bottom. Landing did not hurt the way it would have on Earth, but I turned an ankle. That didn't matter. I wasn't going anywhere. The hole in the ceiling was the only exit. My cell was about 20 feet square. It was, I suppose, carved out of solid rock, although there was no way to tell as the walls and floor and ceiling were the same elephant hide used in the ship. A lighting panel covered half the ceiling, and I would have read if I'd had anything to read. The only other detail was a jet of water that splashed out of a hole in the wall, landed in a depression the size of a washtub, and departed for parts unknown. The place was warm, which was well, as there was nothing resembling bed or bedclothes. I had already concluded that I might be here quite a while and was wondering about eating and sleeping. I decided I was tired of this nonsense. I had been minding my own business out back of my own house. Everything else was Wormface's fault. I sat down on the floor and thought about slow ways to kill him. I finally gave up that foolishness and wondered about Pee-wee and the mother thing. Were they here? Or were they dead somewhere between the mountain and Tombaugh Station? Thinking it over glumly, I decided that poor little Pee-wee was best off if she had never wakened from that second coma. I wasn't sure about the mother thing because I didn't know enough about her. But in Pee-wee's case, I was sure. Well, there was a certain appropriateness to the fix I was in. A knight errant usually lands in a dungeon at some point, but by rights, the maiden fair ought to be imprisoned in a tower in the same castle. Sorry, Pee-wee. As a knight errant, I'm a good soda jerk. Or jerk. His strength is as the strength of 10 because his heart is pure. It wasn't funny. I got tired of punishing myself and looked to see what time it was, not that it mattered. But a prisoner is traditionally expected to scratch marks on the wall, tallying the days he's been in. So I thought I might as well start. My watch was on my wrist, but not running, and I couldn't start it. Maybe 8 Gs was too much for it, even though it was supposed to be shockproof, waterproof, magnetism-proof, and immune to un-American influences. After a while, I lay down and went to sleep. I was awakened by a clatter. It was a ration can hitting the floor, and the fall hadn't helped it. But the key was on it, and I got it open. Corned beef hash, and very good, too. I used the empty can to drink from. The water might be poisonous, but did I have a choice? And then washed the can so that it wouldn't smell. The water was warm. I took a bath. I doubt if many American citizens during the past 20 years have ever needed a bath as much as I did. Then I washed my clothes. My shirt, shorts, and socks were wash and wear synthetics. My slacks were denim and took longer to dry, but I didn't mind. I just wish that I'd had one of the 200 bars of Skyway soap that were home on the floor of my closet. If I had known I was coming to Pluto, I would have brought one. Washing clothes caused me to take inventory. I had a handkerchief, 67 cents in change, a dollar bill so sweat-soaked and worn that it was hard to make out Washington's picture, a mechanical pencil stamped Jay's Drive-In, the thickest malts in town, a canard, I make the thickest, and a grocery list I should have taken care of for Mother, but hadn't because of that silly air conditioner in Charton's drugstore. It wasn't as bedraggled as the dollar bill because it had been in my shirt pocket. I lined up my assets and looked at them. They did not look like a collection that could be reworked into a miracle weapon with which to blast my way out, steal a ship, teach myself to pilot it, and return triumphantly to warn the president and save the country. I rearranged them, and they still didn't. I was correct. They weren't. I woke up from a terrible nightmare, remembered where I was, and wished I was back in the nightmare. I lay there feeling sorry for myself, and presently tears started welling out of my eyes while my chin trembled. I had never been badgered to not be a crybaby, Dad says there's nothing wrong with tears, it's just that they are socially not acceptable. He says that in some cultures, weeping is a social grace. But in Horace Mann Grammar School, being a crybaby was no asset. I gave it up years ago. Besides, it's exhausting and gets you nowhere. I shut off the rain and took stock. My action list ran like this: 1. Escape from this cell. 2. Find Oscar, suit up. 3. Go outdoors, steal a ship, head home, if I could figure out how to gun it. 4. Figure out a weapon or stratagem to fight off the worm faces or keep them busy while I sneaked out and grabbed a ship. Nothing to it. Any Superman capable of teleportation and other assorted psionic tricks could do it. Just be sure the plan is foolproof and that your insurance is paid up. 5. Crash priority. Make sure before bidding farewell to the romantic shores of exotic Pluto and its friendly, colorful natives that neither Pee Wee nor the mother thing is here. If they are, take them along, because contrary to some opinions, it is better to be a dead hero than a live louse. Dying is messy and inconvenient, but even a louse dies someday, no matter what he will do to stay alive, and he is forever having to explain his choice. The gummed up spell that I had had at the hero business had shown that it was undesirable work, but the alternative was still less desirable. The fact that Pee Wee knew how to gun those ships, or that the mother thing could coach me, did not figure. I can't prove that, but I know. Footnote: after I had learned to run one of their ships, could I do so at 8 gravities? That may simply call for arch supports for a worm face, but I knew what 8 Gs did to me. Automatic pilot? If so, would it have directions on it in English? Don't be silly, Clifford. Subordinate footnote: how long would it take to get home at 1 gravity? The rest of the century, or just long enough to starve to death? 6. Occupational therapy for the lulls when I went stale on the problems. This was important in order to avoid coming apart at the seams. O. Henry wrote stories in prison. St. Paul turned out his strongest epistles incarcerated in Rome. Hitler wrote Mein Kampf in jail. Next time, I would bring a typewriter and paper. This time, I would work out magic squares and invent chess problems. Anything was better than feeling sorry for myself. Lions put up with zoos, and wasn't I smarter than a lion? Some, anyway. And so to work. 1. How to get out of this hole. I came up with a straightforward answer. There wasn't any way. The cell was 20 feet on a side with a ceiling 12 feet high. The walls were as smooth as a baby's cheek and as impervious as a bill collector. The other features were the hole in the ceiling, which ran about 6 feet still higher, the stream of water and its catch basin, and a glowing area in the ceiling. For tools, I had the stuff previously listed: a few ounces of nothing much, nothing sharp, nothing explosive or corrosive. My clothes, and an empty tin can. I tested how high I could jump. Even a substitute guard needs springs in his legs. I touched the ceiling. That meant gravity was around 1/2 G. I hadn't been able to guess, as I had spent an endless time under 1/6 gravity, followed by a few eons at 8 Gs, and my reflexes had been mistreated. But although I could touch the ceiling, I could neither walk on it nor levitate. I could get that high, but there was nothing a mouse could cling to. Well, I could rip my clothes and braid a rope. Was there anything near the hole on which to catch it? All I could recall was smooth floor. But suppose it did catch, what next? Paddle around in my skin until Wormface spotted me and herded me back down, this time with no clothes? I decided to postpone the rope trick until I worked out that next step which would confound Wormface and his tribe. I sighed and looked around. All that was left was that jet of water and the floor basin that caught it. There is a story about two frogs trapped in a crock of cream. One sees how hopeless it is, gives up, and drowns. The other is too stupid to know he's licked. He keeps on paddling. In a few hours, he has churned so much butter that it forms an island on which he floats cool and comfortable until the milkmaid comes and chucks him out. That water spilled in and ran out. Suppose it didn't run out. I explored the bottom of the catch basin. The drain was large by our standards, but I thought I could plug it. Could I stay afloat while the room filled up, filled the hole above, and pushed me out the spout? Well, I could find out. I had a can. The can looked like a pint, and a pint's a pound the world around, and a cubic foot of water weighs on Earth a little over 60 pounds. But I had to be sure. My feet are 11 inches long. They've been that size since I was 10. I took a lot of ribbing until I grew into them. I marked 11 inches on the floor with 2 pennies. It turns out that a dollar bill is 2.5 inches wide and a quarter is a smidgen under an inch. Shortly, I knew the dimensions of my room and the can pretty accurately. I held the can under the stream, letting it fill and dumping it fast while I ticked cans of water off on my left hand and counted seconds. Eventually, I calculated how long it would take to fill the room. I didn't like the answer, so I did it over. It would take 14 hours to fill the room and the hole above, plus an hour to allow for crude methods. Could I stay afloat that long? You're darn tootin' I could if I had to, and I had to. There isn't any limit to how long a man can float if he doesn't panic. I balled my slacks and stuffed them in the drain. I almost lost them, so I wrapped them around the can and used the bundle as a cork. It stayed put, and I used the rest of my clothes to caulk it. Then I waited, feeling cocky. Maybe the flood would create the diversion I needed for the rest of the caper. Slowly, the basin filled. The water got about an inch below floor level and stopped. A pressure switch, I suppose. I should have known that creatures who could build 8G constant boost ships would design plumbing to be fail-safe. I wish we could. I recovered my clothes, all but one sock, and spread them to dry. I hoped the sock would foul a pump or something, but I doubted it. They were good engineers. I never really believed that story about the frogs. Another can was tossed down, roast beef and soggy potatoes. It was filling, but I began to long for peaches. The can was stenciled available for subsidized resale on Luna, which made it possible that Skinny and Fatty had come by this food honestly. I wondered how they liked sharing their supplies. No doubt they did so only because Wormface had twisted their arms, which made me wonder why Wormface wanted me alive. I was in favor of it, but I couldn't see why he was. I decided to call each can a day and let the empties be my calendar, which reminded me that I had not worked out how long it would take to get home on a 1G boost if it turned out that I could not arrange automatic piloting at 8Gs. I was stymied on getting out of the cell. I hadn't even nibbled at what I could do if I did get out. Correction, when I did get out, but I would work ballistics. I didn't need books. I've met people, even in this day and age, who can't tell a star from a planet and who think astronomical distances are simply big. They remind me of those primitives who have just four numbers: one, two, three, and many. But any tenderfoot scout knows the basic facts, and a fellow bitten by the space bug, such as myself, usually knows a number of figures. Mother very thoughtfully made a jelly sandwich under no protest. Could you forget that after saying it a few times? Okay, lay it out so. Mother, Mercury, 39 cents. Very, Venus, 72 cents. Thoughtfully, Terra, $1. Made, Mars, $1.50. A, asteroids, assorted prices, unimportant. Jelly, Jupiter, 520. Sandwich, Saturn, 950. Under, Uranus, $19. No, Neptune, $30. Protest, Pluto, 39.50. The prices are distances from the sun in astronomical units. An AU is the mean distance of Earth from the sun, 93 million miles. It is easier to remember one figure that everybody knows and some little figures that it is to remember figures in millions and billions. I use dollar signs because a figure has more flavor if I think of it as money, which Dad considers deplorable. Some way you must remember them, or you don't know your own neighborhood. Now we come to a joker. The list says that Pluto's distance is 39.5 times Earth's distance. But Pluto and Mercury have very eccentric orbits, and Pluto's is a dilly. Its distance varies almost 2 billion miles, more than the distance from the Sun to Uranus. Pluto creeps to the orbit of Neptune and a hair inside, then swings way out and stays there a couple of centuries. It makes only 4 trips around the Sun in 1,000 years. But I had seen that article about how Pluto was coming into its summer, so I knew it was close to the orbit of Neptune now and would be for the rest of my life. My life expectancy in Centerville, I didn't look I didn't look like a preferred risk here. That gave an easy figure, 30 astronomical units. Acceleration problems are simple. S equals 1 half at squared. Distance equals half the acceleration times the square of the elapsed time. If astrogation were as simple as that, any sophomore could pilot a rocket ship. The complications come from gravitational fields and the fact that everything moves 14 directions at once. But I could disregard gravitational fields and planetary motions. At the speeds a worm-faced ship makes, neither factor matters until you are very close. I wanted a rough answer. I missed my slipstick. Dad says anyone who can't use a slide rule is a cultural illiterate and should not be allowed to vote. Mine's a beauty, a K&E 20-inch log-log duplex decitrig. Dad surprised me with it after I mastered a 10-inch polyphase. We ate potato soup that week, but Dad says you should always budget luxuries first. I knew where it was, home on my desk. No matter, I had figures, formulas, pencil, and paper. First, a check problem. Fats had said Pluto, 5 days, and 8 gravities. It's a two-piece problem. Accelerate for half time and half distance, do a skew flip and decelerate the other half time and distance. You can't use the whole distance in the equation. As time appears as a square, it's a parabolic. Was Pluto in opposition, or quadrature, or conjunction? Nobody looks at Pluto, so why remember where it is on the ecliptic? Oh well, the average distance was 30 AUs. That would give a close enough answer. Half that distance in feet is multiply, multiply, multiply. 8 gravities is more multiplying. Speed increases at 258 feet per second every second up to the skew flip and then decreases just as fast thereafter. So more multiplying. And you wind up with the time for half the trip in seconds. Double that for a full trip. Divide by 3,600 to get hours. Divide by 24 and you have days. On a slide rule, such a problem takes 40 seconds, most of it to get your decimal point correct. It's as easy as computing sales tax. It took me at least an hour and almost as long to prove it because using a different sequence and a third time because the answers didn't match. I had forgotten to multiply by 5,280 and had miles on one side and feet on the other. A no good way to do arithmetic. Then a fourth time because my confidence was shaken. I tell you, the slide rule is the greatest invention since girls. But I got a proved answer, 5.5 days. I was on Pluto, or maybe Neptune. No, on Neptune, I would not be able to jump a 12-foot ceiling. Pluto alone matched all the facts. So I erased and computed the trip at 1 gravity with turnover. 15 days. It seemed to me that it ought to take at least 8 times as long as the 1G at 8, more like 64. Then I was glad I had bowled my way through analytical geometry, for I made a rough plot and saw the trouble. Squared time cut down the advantage, because the more boost, the shorter the trip, and the shorter the trip, the less time in which to use the built-up speed. To cut time in half, you need 4 times as much boost. To cut it to a quarter, you need 16 times as much boost, and so on. That way lies bankruptcy. To learn that I could get home in about 2 weeks at 1 gravity cheered me. I couldn't starve in 2 weeks. If I could steal a ship, if I could run it, if I could climb out of this hole, if, not if, but when. I was too late for college this year. 15 more days wouldn't matter. I had noticed in the first problem the speed we had been making at skew flip, more than 11,000 miles per second. That's a nice speed, even in space. It made me think. Consider the nearest star, Proxima Centauri, 4 3/10 light years away. the distance you hear so often on quiz shows. How long at 8 Gs? The problem was the same sort, but I had to be careful about decimal points. The figures mount up. A light year is, I had forgotten. So multiply and get 25 trillion miles. Phew. It works out to a year and 5 months. Not as long as a trip around the Horn last century. Why, these monsters had star travel. I don't know why I was surprised. It had been staring me in the face. I had assumed that Wormface had taken me to his home planet, that he was a Plutonian or a plutocrat or whatever the word is. But he couldn't be. He breathed air. He kept his ship warm enough for me. When he wasn't in a hurry, he cruised at 1G, near enough. He used lighting that suited my eyes. Therefore, he came from the sort of planet I came from. Proxima Centauri is a double star, as you know if you do crossword puzzles, and one is a twin for our own sun. Size, temperature, spectral pattern. Is it a fair guess that it has a planet like Earth? I had a dirty hunch I knew Wormface's home address. I knew where he didn't come from, not from a planet that runs a couple of centuries in utter airlessness with temperatures pushing absolute zero, followed by a summer in which some gases melt but water is solid rock and even Wormface has to wear a spacesuit, nor from anywhere in our system, for I was sure as taxes that Wormface felt at home only on a planet like ours. Never mind the way he looked. Spiders don't look like us, but they like things that we like. There must be 1,000 spiders in our houses for every one of us. Wormface and his kin would like Earth. My fear was they liked it too much. I looked at Proxima Centauri again and saw something else. The turnover speed read 1,111,000 miles per second, 6 times the speed of light. Relativity theory says it's impossible. I wanted to talk to Dad about it. Dad reads everything from The Anatomy of Melancholy to Acta Mathematica and Paris Match, and will sit on a curbstone separating damp newspapers wrapped around garbage in order to see the continued on page 8. Dad would haul down a book and we'd look it up. Then he would try 4 or 5 more with other opinions. Dad doesn't hold with the idea that it must be true or they wouldn't have printed it. He doesn't consider any opinion sacred. It shocked me the first time he took out a pen and changed something in one of my math books. Still, even if speed of light was a limit, 4 or 5 years wasn't impossible or even impractical. We've been told for so long that starships, even to the nearest star, would take generations that we may have a wrong slant. A mile of lunar mountains is a long way, but 1 trillion miles in empty space may not be. But what was Wormface doing on Pluto? If you were invading another star system, how would you start? I'm not joking. A dungeon on Pluto is no joke, and I never laughed at Wormface. Would you just barge in or toss your hat in first? They seemed far ahead of us in engineering, but they wouldn't have known that ahead of time. Wouldn't it be smart to build a supply base in that system at some spot nobody ever visited? Then you could set up advanced bases, say on airless satellites of likely looking planets, from which you could scout the surface of the target planet. If you lost your scouting base, you would pull back to your main base and work out a new attack. Remember that while Pluto is a long way off to us, it was only 5 days from Luna for Wormface. Think about World War II, back when speeds were slow. Main base is safely out of reach, the USA or Pluto, but only about 5 days from advanced base, England or the Moon, which is 3 hours from the theater of operations, France, Germany, or the Earth. That's a slow way to operate, but it worked for the Allies in World War II. I just hoped it would not work for Wormface's gang. Though I didn't see anything to prevent it. Somebody chucked down another can, spaghetti and meatballs. If it had been canned peaches, I might not have had the fortitude to do what I did next, which was to use it for a hammer before I opened it. I beat an empty can into a flat, narrow shape and beat a point on it, which I sharpened on the edge of the catch basin. When I was through, I had a dagger. Not a good one, but it made me feel less helpless. Then I ate. I felt sleepy and went to sleep in a warm glow. I was still a prisoner, but I had a weapon of sorts, and I believed that I had figured out what I was up against. Getting a problem analyzed is two-thirds of solving it. I did not have nightmares. And we'll find what happens when Kip wakes up next time.